For example, it provides water for our crops, ensure our livestock don't go thirsty, even powers some of our homes, but for the most part in Marsh Valley, it provides an area for the community to swim, enjoy, gather, and float.
Thousands of years ago, the Portneuf River was actually part of the ancient Bear River, which stretched from Utah through Idaho and Wyoming before returning in Utah. Now, the Portneuf spans from the southeastern part of Idaho and Caribou County, and eventually joining the Snake River and American Falls Reservoir in American Falls. This waterway has its own collection of history. History that started with Earth's changing atmosphere nearly 15,000 years ago. Looking at the modern-day map of Idaho, the Snake River Plain is a vast area of flatland that breaks up the natural geology of the usually montane state. Back then, a giant glacial lake existed over the majority of Utah and shared some space in Nevada. Scientists believe a shift in the tectonic plates increased the geothermal activity, which resulted in the natural dam of ice holding the lake back to explode, draining the frozen water across several states. Popularly referred to as the Lake Bonneville Flood, this ancient occurrence resulted in 1,200 cubic miles of water, significantly altering the landscape along the Snake River Plain. This dramatic event is not only what shaped the states, but also explains the birth of the Snake River, Bear River, and Portneuf, and how all three are connected historically. Though the Portneuf stretches for over 124 miles, most of that is channelized in canals or concrete passageways. Much of its length outside urban areas like Pocatello remains relatively untouched, while the urban sections are channelized or piped for agricultural and living reasons. This leaves around 80 miles of natural habitat and nutrient-rich water, providing neighboring communities with a vast array of habitat that is essential for many of the wildlife that also utilize the river for similar ways as we humans do.
As much as I would love to travel 80 miles along the Portneuf River to explore the various ecosystems and habitats, that's a very long way for a girl, let alone her tiny film crew.
Hey.
So instead, I met with Alissa Salmore, a senior environmental planner at the Idaho Transportation Department. She's been working here for over 13 years and started a river restoration project in McCammon in 2015. I'm here with Alissa Salmore from the Idaho Transportation Department. Thank you for joining me, Alissa.
Sure.
Hey. So I guess my first question is, can you explain a little bit about the history of the restoration project area out in McCammon?
Okay, sure. So the highway department, we build roads, and sometimes they go through protected habitat. Wetlands are a type of habitat that's been found to be really important for water quality, water quantity, groundwater generation, absorption and generation, and also for wildlife habitat. It's a relatively rare habitat type. And anyway, so over the years, there's been federal and state protections for wetlands, and one of those is if we permanently fill wetlands, then we have to compensate for that in some way. It's easier to create a wetland if the wetland hydrology is already there. And so when the property at McCammon came up for sale, we knew that it already had natural wetlands on it. It had the river right there. And so the highway department bought part of the parcel first and made some wetlands, and then acquired the rest of the property at a later date when there was a willing seller that was interested, that was going to sell the abutting parcel. So we got that, and since then we've been the first thing we did is take the cows off. We don't do livestock management at the highway department, so we were letting it regenerate naturally. And then also, as projects have come up since then, this was 2015, I think, is when we bought it. or maybe it was 2017, we started to do wetland restoration out there as part of road projects that we were building, and it happened to have to fill in wetlands.
Mhm.
So since then, we've done a number of vegetation management projects to try to enhance the native vegetation and control the invasive weeds. We've done some derelict fence removal. We've had a few projects that had relatively large impacts since on their target site. So we did the last one we've done, the latest one is that we are restoring about 1,700 linear feet of the Portneuf River bank that had been during the previous cattle management. They'd removed all the vegetation from the bank and tried to flatten out the pasture. And so it caused destabilizing of the bank, and so we went in and reshaped the bank so it wouldn't fall right in the river, and then we planted a bunch of willows and other native plants along there. So we're working on it piece by piece. It's a 70-acre parcel, so there's a lot to do out there, but we also have a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of wildlife have come in, and it's really nice to see some of the transitioning of that property.
Alissa and her team dedicated themselves to planting sagebrush, willows, bulrush, milkweed, hawthorn, dogwood, and cottonwoods to compete with the invasive plants that had sprouted on the parcel prior to being bought off by the ITD.
If we had a wetland that was kind of in the middle of surrounded by uplands, and we might have a different suite of functions that than we would of a riparian wetland that was right on a riverbank. So for example, bank stability and erosion control is one of the functions of a wetland. And so something on a riverbank would have higher potential for riverbank stabilization than would be like a little pond in the middle of a field or something, or in the middle of a forest. So we kind of do this assessment for where we fill wetlands and then our target mitigation site. So we want to do apples to apples usually. So if we're ruining something that does a certain thing and serves a certain type of habitat, we want to try to replace that in the landscape. And so that's how we pick what we're doing as far as restoration projects out there. So for the riverbank, we're stabilizing the bare soil slopes. Like I said about with the earthworks, we did some replanting, and we targeted certain types of plants. So the impact site was a small creek up north of Pocatello, and it had lots of willows and cottonwoods, and that project was building more bridge over that creek, and so it turned it into concrete walls. And so we wanted to pick an area in that watershed that we were bringing back the willows and the cottonwoods into that. We have another parcel that or a project that is removing canal bank wetlands, which are pretty low functioning. They usually have invasive grasses and seasonally wet, kind of just herbaceous vegetation. And so for that, what we're doing is we're actually creating new ponded low spots and bringing in native sedges and other types of plantings. So there's that. We've done some Russian olive tree removal. Russian olive is an invasive tree that does really great here, but tends to take the place of the native cottonwood trees that do a lot more. There are a lot more insects that are hosted on native cottonwoods than they are on Russian olives, and so they can they're better for the food chain, moving that energy up into the food chain. So we trying to remove the Russian olives and bring in some of the native woody vegetation. So that's kind of mostly what we've been doing out there.
Because you mentioned that you can't ever like make it back to normal, but like what would meet your standards? Like what would make you happy about it?
Okay. So I think there's two questions there. Like, what are our goals for the restoration ultimately? And the second is like, what is the public access and management that ITD has in mind for that parcel. So I'll answer the public access question first. It is public land now because ITD is a state agency, and so whatever we own is considered public land. However, our public land isn't like multi-use, open for everybody to use like it is for some types of lands. The mandate of the highway department is to provide road and transportation properties, and because of that, and because of the nature of those facilities, they can be very dangerous. And so we have the right to kind of control access to our transportation properties.
Nestled between an active railroad track and the highway is a small area of land owned by the Idaho Transportation Department. It is known as the Portneuf River Wetland Reserve. Just between the city of Lava and McCammon, it's an area some drive past and others visit on occasion to fish or swim in the river on the opposite side. The public has access to this area for hiking, birdwatching, and fishing, but hunting and the use of motorized vehicles is strictly prohibited to prevent unnecessary amounts of stress on the recovering habitat. This whole area used to be wild, then turned to crops, then pasture for cows. The previous owner had dug up the riverbeds and created canals for drinking water for their cattle, which also threatened the delicate spring that exists within the basalt cliff. Many efforts are being made to restore this area, and with the help of an unexpected guest, the progression has become increasingly more obvious.
So we met earlier before I started my project. We met actually out there on the restoration area project thingy, and we saw that there was lots of sign of beaver, and you expressed while we were out there how cool and how you weren't expecting to see beaver out there. So what are your thoughts, opinions on the beaver, and why were you so surprised to see them out there, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Oh, I'm surprised. I was surprised to see them out there because I think there's a lot of human disturbance in that reach of the river. And so if you're thinking about an animal that's trying to colonize an already disturbed area, I think it's very risky, high danger habitat. So the fact that they were able to have some little family group that's been surviving out there is amazing. I mean, there's roads, there's the railroad, people can trap beaver wherever they want. So, for all I know, there's a guy up the river 100 feet that has traps in the river to catch beaver. I have no idea. Just because we don't allow it on that little segment of the river doesn't mean that that other people don't in their part of the river. And it doesn't mean, beaver don't know where my ITD property ends and somebody else's begins. So they're moving through a very dangerous environment. So that's why I was surprised. I was happy to see them there, and I hope they are safe as they can be to do their thing and make more wetlands on that piece of our property. But I can only let them be there. I can't protect them everywhere else on the river there.
Right. They seem to be kind of rebellious and defying all odds. They're like, oh, you don't want me here? I'm going to be here anyways.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll see.
Interestingly enough, despite choosing to inhibit such a dangerous stretch of the Portneuf, it seems as though our beavers are well adapted to their new home, usually being seen at night rather than during the daylight hours to prevent detection by curious humans and predators.
It was regarding the beavers and how you think they're helping or hurting restore the project or the landscape, changing the landscape, and if they're actually helping you guys with your restoration project or hurting you guys with that.
Oh, they're 100% helping for sure. In that part where they built their dam, there was that little spring and a little streamlet. And we had some patches of persistent wetland there, but when they pond it, it changes a little bit. So we might see some of if those dams stay in place, what were the sedges on the little creek bank will probably get drowned out, but maybe the bulrush and the pasture sedges will take off and be more successful. And so we'll see. I mean, it's always kind of a successional thing.
North American beavers, well known for their extraordinary ability to chew down trees and blockade rivers and streams to create completely new ecosystems. And here they are, helping restore the marshland back to how it was before. With the blockage of the spring, the dams allow the water to rise above where it normally would have flowed, seeping into the ground and covering the grassy acre, attracting neighbors of plenty. We are nearing the conclusion of this meeting. Again, thank you so
Mhm.
much for meeting me.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. I do have one more question. So in this specific area, we have the pondage area that you guys created, just across the Portneuf from where the spring is. And then we also have, the river. It kind of curves around, goes under the roadways right there and continues down the highway. But what makes this tiny spring so important, and why do you guys want to kind of restore that area so bad?
It just happens that the context of that property, it's in this very interesting area where you have some interesting geology. You have the basalt cliffs and shelving in the soil profile. You have geothermal things going on. I mean, it's all throughout that corridor, not just by lava hot springs, but if you look in the river there, we've got geothermal rock. So there is activity there. And then we have, some topography. It's kind of goes up on to the hills on one side and is kind of in the valley bottoms otherwise. So I think there's a lot of complexity to that site. And the spring is just another piece of that complexity. And whenever you have like diversity of habitats and soil profiles and all that, you get richness of what could be there as far as ecology and so I think it's important because it's part of the richness of the site. I think in southeastern Idaho, it's a semi-arid area, and so any type of water resource is rare. Even though it's next to the river, this is a different type of aquatic habitat, and so you have potential, like you said, for amphibians. We've got, until the beavers built their dam right in the mouth of it, but there was could have been a spawning run. Probably could still be a little bit of spawning at the very end of it, but yeah, all sorts of reasons why that is important. And there's some, I would say, waxing philosophical, there's cultural importance to it from a kind of a long historic timeline. That was part of probably how people have moved through there, both in ancient times and modern history times. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool because it's such a small acreage of land, but it has such a complexity in not only plant but animal diversity. And
mhm,
that's probably like the coolest thing about it is like it's so small, but its
mhm.
character is so big.
Yeah, that's a really good way to say it. I like that.
Yeah.
The marsh is a place of endless cycles, where life begins, thrives, and through death gives rise to new beginnings. Even the smallest actions here hold profound meaning. A fallen leaf drifts into the water, decomposes, and enriches the soil, nurturing new growth. These cycles, repeated countless times, lay the foundation of a thriving ecosystem. At the heart of this transformation stands the beaver, a creature of ingenuity and purpose. By building dams, they slow the flow of water, creating pools that shelter fish, nourish plants, and provide homes for countless species. In this restored land, the cycle of life and death continues, guided by nature's engineers. Together, they weave a story of resilience and recovery, reminding us of the incredible possibilities when we give nature the chance to heal.